A Rockford native is opening up about her postpartum journey in her very first book. WIFR reporter Bria Walters talks to Shane Terry about how birth and healing can connect people in unexpected ways.
Leave, a postpartum account, is described as a portal that connects people through pain, joy, death, and new life. Terry says the book is not therapy, but art based on her experience.
I didn't think anyone else would ever see it. It was a project that I was working on for myself.
Shane Terry says writing Leave, a postpartum account, felt like an assignment she needed to do when recovering from giving birth in 2019.
I was taking lots of notes on the process of healing, and those notes eventually, I thought maybe I'd turn them into an essay. I started writing that essay and it got longer and longer.
The pages are a culmination of Terry's experience and larger world issues like the lack of paid parental leave, intergenerational trauma, and opioid use.
These are realities that people who are giving birth are facing and thinking about and worrying about and struggling through.
Rachel Leone, Terry's friend, was the first person to read Leave. She says she's read it multiple times since.
It's really unique in that it's not just a book about her birth experience.
Leone says the world needs more raw, real books like this to help guide people with similar experiences.
I'm really grateful for small presses that release books like this and that take risks and that are outside of the, what you might find in traditional publishing.
Though Terry never expected to write a nonfiction book, the reaction has made her feel empowered and understood.
If I had only received one message like that, it would be worth it. I've received tons of messages from people saying, thank you, I'm not as lonely as I was before.
Terry says the book offers something to everyone, not just women who have given birth.
Thank you, Bria. And she also mentions birth resources in the Stateline. One of those resources is Winning Start Winnebago, a program that provides home visits to all Winnebago County families after birth.